Welcome to our course on trauma-informed care for ministry. The idea of trauma-informed care is that we approach ministry with an understanding that most folks that are attracted and drawn to our churches and our ministries have experienced previous trauma in their lives. And so often in our churches and in our ministries, we do find it challenging to work with difficult people, individuals that are reactive, individuals that are dysfunctional, individuals that are anxious in their attachment styles, all kinds of things. And what you'll find when you go beneath the layer, when you go beneath the surface and peel the layers of the onion back, you'll find that most of those folks that present with challenging behavior typically have experienced trauma. Many times that trauma goes back to childhood. So a trauma-informed ministry is a ministry that has this understanding that many of the people that we work with have previous trauma, previous pain, and they bring that pain forward in their life to the present. It can impact relationships, the way they interact with individuals, and it creates a high need within your ministry and within the church. And so trauma informed care is about an understanding of who you're working with. It's also about creating safe places for these individuals to come, to heal, to find peace, and to find help and victory over the past pain. As we further consider trauma informed care for ministry, I want to bring your awareness to a study that began back in the 1980s. The study of adverse childhood experiences. This was a longitudinal study. They traced families and children for years and they tracked and recorded the data. Here's what they discovered, and what has been discovered in the research will make a lot of sense to you. Adults who have difficulty with relationships, holding jobs, difficulties with parenting, difficulties with substance use issues, all kinds of social ills, the individuals that struggle in these particular areas typically have had a high number or a high level of adverse childhood experiences. What we know is that the greater the level of the adverse childhood experiences in young life, it has the higher potential to impact our adult life. And we carry that dysfunction and we carry that pain over. And so this study has been uh, so well researched and so well validated that the obvious is true. Children need a nurturing environment. Children need to be cared for. If they are neglected, if they are abused, if they experience psychological mistreatment, that carries on greatly into their adult life. These children have been tracked over years. What they have found, those were the children that had the most problems in schools, academically, behaviorally, higher rates of incarceration, higher rates of all kinds of things. And so, what we know is that children that are loved, that are cared for, typically um, behave better, they have better outcomes, they're set up for success. Well, you say this sounds very obvious. Well, it's very important for you to understand this study and be aware of this. In the study, it's interesting. They define the data to the point where they could give numbers. And you can actually take a test and a score on this. And the higher your ACE score is, the more likely you're dealing with a number of traumatic issues in your life, and it's probably impacting you in various ways. And so the ACE score system is a good indicator. It's a good predictor of challenging behaviors or dysfunctional behaviors that may be manifesting in life. It gives you a place in your counseling as a starting point to explore and help and to actually provide good counsel and have a better understanding of the individuals that you're working with. With regard to the ACE scores and these ACE studies that have been done over time now, some interesting studies have come out with regards to those in the helping professions, police officers, teachers, counselors, doctors, and yes, seminary students. An interesting study by Holloman and Associates revealed that seminary students had higher ACE scores than the typical population of their age demographic. What does that tell us? That tells us that many times these high adverse childhood experiences, it could be neglect, it could be abuse, it could be experiencing poverty, divorce, whatever it may be, can impact us in, yes, a positive way. Many times, that early childhood pain can be the seedbed, it can be the impetus to drive a person into the helping ministry. And it's many times something that God uses in our life to give us compassion and a burden and a desire to help others. And so the ACE score in your life will either be debilitating, it will be crippling. You will see yourself as a victim, or you're dealing with such pain that you can't escape it, or it can be a driving force for good. Post-traumatic growth is a benefit, and there's a ton of research on post-traumatic growth, post-traumatic wisdom, post-traumatic strength and resilience. And so what we know is that many people in our ministries, in our congregations, have a past of pain, of difficulty. They have things that they have overcome. No doubt, as you're taking this course, you may be reflecting in your own life. And more than likely, if you're taking this class and you have a desire to help somebody and to help others, you have experienced the victory over adverse childhood experiences in your own journey. And so may this be a point of reference. May this be a point of awareness as you are helping others and even finding your own healing in your own unique journey. By way of illustration, let me talk to you about Eric Liddell. Eric Liddell is a famous person from history. His life is significant and a cultural influence even to this day. You say, well, who was he? Eric Liddell was a missionary's son. He was from Scotland. His parents were Scottish. The missionaries went to China. There he was raised in a missionary's home. There they ministered to the people of China. But Eric was a tremendous athlete. And so he played polo, he played rugby, and he was a tremendous sprinter. And so he was known as the Flying Scotsman. And so he goes all the way to the Olympics as a young man. And so in 1924, he wins the gold medal for the 400-meter race. And at that time, he broke all records. And the story was portrayed in a movie that you may be familiar with, The Chariots of Fire. And The Chariots of Fire is a very inspiring movie. It's about his life, it's about his story, and it swept the Oscars when it was released, and it's still a tremendous movie to this day. And so the story that's portrayed in the movie is that this Scotsman with deep religious conviction runs in the races within the Olympics, the 100 meter, his best race, the race that he was favored to win. He scheduled, but the heat was scheduled for Sunday. Being a man of faith and being a man of deep conviction, he saw that Sunday was a Sabbath, and he didn't work on Sunday. He didn't do athletics on Sunday. It was the Lord's day. And he was true to his conviction. He did not run the 100-meter race, which he was the favored to win. What he does is he signs up for the 400-meter race, which he was not favored to win because he is a sprinter, and it seemed as though he would go to the 400-meter race and he would run out of gas, and so it did not look good for Little. But what Little does, he goes to that race, he stays true to his conviction, and he runs the 400-meter race as a sprint. He breaks all records. He wins the gold medal. He stays true to his conviction. It's a very inspiring story. And so that's where the movie would end. The story continues. What does Little do with the rest of his life? Well, he's just won gold medal. He is now famous. He is a hero in Scotland. And this young man goes back to China. He retires from athletics and he embraces the call of God upon his life. And he goes back to China and he ministers for the rest of his life. He would find a wife, he would raise a family. But as time went on, the world would go into a period of time of turmoil. World War II. What would happen? Japan would invade China, where Little was ministering. Not only that, Great Britain would now pronounce war against Japan. Japan would counter strike, and they would strike the Americans, and America was struck in at Pearl Harbor. And now America is brought into the war as all of that pressure came down rapidly fast. Little got his family safe back to Europe, and there he continues to minister. Well, as all of this is happening, the Japanese seize power. They began to take all of the families in China and anybody with foreign allegiances, and they put them in internment camps, much like the concentration camps. And so there, Eric would continue to minister, and his life as a missionary and the stories told about how he's ministering to families within these internment camps under great pressure and all kinds of stress and traumatic events are legendary, and they're very inspiring. And yes, the story would play out that due to the poor conditions and the lack of food and the disease that would run through those camps, he died in his early 40s in the internment camp, separated from his family. And so here is a young man that had the favor of God, the blessing of God upon his life. He was a hero in Europe. He was the Flying Scotsman, the gold medalist champion, the man who broke all the world records at that time because of his speed and commitment to athletics. He gives it all away. He gives his life completely and utterly to Christ on a foreign field in China. The war breaks out, the pressure comes down, and his dream, his life as he would envision it with his family, his children, his ministry, all come to a traumatic end. And his faith is so strong and his belief in God is so pure. And so he wrote many things in his journals and memoirs. One I'll share with you because I think this is of significance. Little would say it this way: circumstances may appear to wreck our lives and God's plans, but God is not helpless among the ruins. God is not helpless among the ruins. I find that is such an inspiring and powerful quote. And so, why am I discussing this and bringing this to our attention? Because we will minister to many individuals who have experienced trauma or who are experiencing trauma. And part of your ministry and part of your counseling and part of your role as a helping minister to individuals that hurt are to help them through that healing process of these setbacks, these injustices, these painful events that come up into our lives that are unfair, they're unwarranted, they're uncalled for, but they happen. And we must stand with our people in faith. We must encourage and we must help them walk through this process, this part of their journey, to the point of healing, to the point of victory, and help them to see that God is not absent or helpless in the ruins, that God is present, that God is here, that God is able. And so this is yet but an inspiring story, but it reminds me that many of the people that we work with and that are attracted to our ministries are hurting. Sometimes the pain is present, sometimes it's past, sometimes it surfaces in our lives in all kinds of unpredictable ways. And we look at folks and we are puzzled at times because they are so reactive. We seem to think, oh my goodness, they are so immature. And how do we help this person? They're so difficult to work with. Most of the time, if you realize that this person is dealing with a lot of pain, it gives you an understanding of where this dysfunction comes from. It gives you a point of reference to help them and to work with them to the point of healing, to the point of wisdom, to the point of maturity. Because we know this, that in post traumatic stress, for those who are resilient, there is post traumatic wisdom, post traumatic blessing, post traumatic anointing. There are benefits that can be found in the trauma. And so this is yet but another example of how we can help and how we can minister therapeutically to others who are dealing with a lot of pain that is hidden beneath the surface. Consider with me, if you will, trauma and mental health. Trauma and mental health. A person that is dealing with mental health issues, if they are not well emotionally, if they have a mental illness or a diagnosis, I can assure you that most of those individuals have experienced trauma in their life, adverse childhood experiences, adult trauma, current trauma, ongoing trauma. but there is a definite connection between trauma and our mental health, especially when those who present with a mental illness. What is trauma? Trauma is a word that really means wound. And so, who are traumatized people? Traumatized individuals are wounded individuals. A person that has experienced a trauma in their life, they have been wounded, and most people walk around with those wounds exposed, with those wounds still hurting. Most people do not reach out for counsel, for help. Most people bury the pain, suppress the pain, and it comes out in all types of unhealthy ways. Inappropriate behavior, dangerous behavior, risk taking behavior. And so when you are a trauma informed ministry, you're operating from the perspective that most of the folks that we're dealing with who are in pain, who are challenging, have been traumatized. They have experienced trauma. And so in trauma informed care, there is a shift. Back in the day, the mental health community would diagnose everybody. Well, this is your diagnosis. You're bipolar, you're schizophrenic, you're whatever. And basically, what they were doing was they were saying, this is what's wrong with you. And so, by using the diagnosis, they would pathologize the problem and the individual. And the labels aren't very helpful. Now, from a clinical perspective, I appreciate and I do see the value in identifying symptoms and categorizing them and having a diagnosis to work from. But the problem with that is we tend to pathologize people, and by that I'm saying we label them and we're saying to them in essence, what's wrong with you? Here's your label. This is what's wrong with you. You're broken. You're unfixable. And it really doesn't put us in a place of compassion. It doesn't move us to a point of helping effectively or with a heart that God would have us to help others with. There's no compassion in labeling. And so, what a trauma informed ministry approach does for you is it shifts you from saying what's wrong with you to what happened to you. What happened to you? What's the story? Where does it begin? And generally, when you sit down and talk with an individual, and discover the story. You discover those adverse childhood experiences. You experience ongoing pain in their life, difficulties, wounds that they have. You realize that there is a reason for the current pain and the current dysfunction and the current behavior that they're struggling with. And so it's a shift. A trauma informed ministry shifts the perspective from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. How can I help? What have you been through? And it's when you meet a person at that point in those conversations, you can truly shift to healing, to hope, to resilience. In my effort to educate, inform, and enlighten, let me bring your attention to some of the current medical professionals, researchers, and authors of our day. And so, one quote that I will give you, and an author that I'd like to introduce you to, is Gabor Mate, who is a Canadian medical doctor. He has a lot to say about trauma and addiction. I think some of his writings are profound and worth our attention. He would say it this way: trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. What does he mean? He's saying that trauma is not equal, that everyone's trauma is different. It's one thing that may happen to you, it's another thing what happens to me. We both may respond to it differently and very uniquely. And so it's the event, yes, but it's how I perceive the event. It's how I respond to the event. It's how I store that event inside me. And yes, when I'm triggered, it all comes out. And so trauma is not always visualized in a memory. It's not always able to be conveyed in a story. Sometimes it comes out very reactively in our lives. Another author would be Peter Levine. Peter Levine would talk about trauma as the tyranny of the past. And yes, it is oppressive. It is overtaking and overwhelming, like an army oppressing a people or a nation. And your thoughts do just that. They come upon you, those images, many times, those memories can just continually attack a person. And so there are those who experience trauma and they suppress it in such a way where there's no memory of it. They can't verbalize it, but yet it comes out reactively. And then there are others who tend to relive the traumatic event. It becomes a part of their identity, it becomes who they are. And for both of these types of individuals, we need help and we need healing. And there is hope in all of this, but it is a process to work through. Healing is a journey. Another author that I will introduce you to is Dr. Bruce Perry. Bruce Perry is a neuropsychologist, and coming from the neurosciences, he has a lot to say about how the brain works and about how trauma is perceived inside of us. Perry would say it like this: the more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely he will be able to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. Perry would tell us that yes, trauma can be healed. A traumatized child or a traumatized adult can heal, they can thrive once again. And how do we heal? We heal through human relationship. We heal through human touch. We heal through human connection because we are created for connection. And in church ministry, is this important? Yes, you better believe it because we offer connection. And so there is that process of ministering to others, connecting individuals to community. What we know is that we don't heal in isolation. We don't heal apart from community. And so, in relationship, yes, it's true that that is where most of our pain has come from, but it's also the place in relationship, in healthy relationship, where we find the greatest level of healing and restoration. The word restoration is such a beautiful word. It has the idea of healing and it has the idea of bringing back to a former state and even a better state. And so God is our healer. God has this wonderful ability to take us through this process of healing. How does the Lord do this in our lives? Many times we are being healed, not only through time, not only through talking and tears, but we are also being healed through healthy relationship, healthy community involvement, healthy community interactions. And so God uses the connection in our life. God uses the connection through the church, throughout the kingdom of God to heal his people. And so resilience, healing, health is found in relationship. And so that is not only something that the Bible would support and you would find in alignment with your faith, that is also something that the neuroscience community is telling us that healing comes through healthy relationships. As we conclude this video, let me say that there is hope and there is healing. Trauma is not a life sentence. It does not have to be your identity. The tyranny of your past does not have to be the tyranny of your present. And God is victorious, and he brings his people into victory. And so I would tell you this from Psalm 147 and verse 3, he heals the brokenhearted and he binds up their wounds. God is the God of all compassion, and he can bind, he can tend to your wounds or to your trauma. He can heal your trauma. It's not to say that the trauma never existed, that it never happened, but it is to say that in healing, the trauma no longer tortures me. It no longer controls me. It no longer dominates me. It's no longer my identity. But in that trauma, it can be recycled in a resilient fashion and manner to become my strength. And it can even drive me to help others. It can propel me to ministry and to comfort others. And so, as you're working with people, minister from a trauma informed perspective, realizing that everyone that you meet, everyone that you minister to, has a story. And so, it's not what what's wrong with you? But it's really the question of what happened to you. How can I help? How can we heal and go past this? How can we experience God's presence in this pain, in this trauma? Yes, God can heal our wounds. He can heal our trauma. So God bless you as you continue your journey in this helping ministry of counseling.